I'm Mel Hightower, and as was just mentioned, a proud Financial Health Network board member and the founder of High Tide Content Lab, a new content studio that really is focused on storytelling in order to inspire action towards a brighter, more equitable future. It's important that when we are designing solutions that we hear all voices and all stories. Stories like my grandmother's, who worked as a short order cook while my grandfather was serving in World War II and didn't use a financial institution until she was well into her 40s. Speaking of storytelling that inspires change, I'm so excited to be here today with Stephanie Land and to hear her story. Before doing so, I just want to take a quick poll. How many of you have watched the acclaimed Netflix series Maid or read the book Maid or Class? Just a show of hands. Wow, wonderful. If you haven't seen or read those works, regardless, you'll have the treat of hearing firsthand from Stephanie Land, the best-selling author of Maid, Hard Work, Low Pay, and A Mother's Will to Survive. It's a memoir that recounts her journey as a single mother navigating the poverty trap. Her powerful story exposes the harsh realities faced by domestic workers and highlights systemic class inequalities. After escaping a violent home only to experience homelessness, Stephanie began cleaning houses for $9 an hour while pursuing government assistance. After years of scraping by, she fulfilled her dream, graduating with a degree in English at the University of Montana and becoming a freelance writer. Her viral essay for Vox expanded into her best-selling memoir, which inspired the next Netflix critically acclaimed series. Her second memoir, Class, a memoir of motherhood, hunger, and higher education, continues her story, detailing the challenges of being a poor college student and a single parent. She writes about economic and social justice issues, as well as domestic abuse, chronic illness, and motherhood. And her work has been featured in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Guardian, and the Atlantic, among many other outlets and publications. With that, please join me in welcoming Stephanie. Stephanie, let's dig right on in. Your memoir really sheds a light on the stigma surrounding poverty and domestic work. Is there a pivotal experience that you can share that shaped your views on financial health and stability?
Well, thank you for that introduction. That was very nice to sit next to and, and listen to. I have been talking about this as like a public figure for several years. I graduated college and immediately tried to figure out what I was going to write about and kind of fell into writing about poverty. I had housing security. I had a low-income apartment that I could definitely afford, and that freed me up to be able to write, basically. And since then, I feel like I am somewhat constantly educating people on something that, to me was something that ruled my life. And that was, just in barely making ends meet, I used food stamps. I qualified for food stamps. And food stamps don't pay for things like self-care, like toilet paper or shampoo or tampons. And there were some months, especially in the time period that Maid took place, that I was working full-time, but after paying all of my bills, I only had $20 left for the entire month. And that was how I bought, soap and feminine hygiene. And if my daughter needed any clothes, if I needed work clothes, that's the money that I had for that. And so it was, that narrow of a margin in how I survived.
Yeah, I think it's really important to really understand that for many, and for you in particular, financial health was really about survival at its core.
There was a term that was coined by Matthew Desmond, and that was the rent always eats first.
Right.
And so there were days that, because I was a house cleaner, the job that I did was seen as a bonus or not necessary to my clients sometimes. It was, extra help around the holidays. It was, I'm going to treat myself. It was a gift that someone received for a baby shower or something like that. And so that made the work itself very unstable because people would cancel a lot. And if I had a client who canceled, that's $30, that's my electric bill. Right. And suddenly I can't pay my bills.
It strikes me that what the work that you do that's given to others as a luxury has such a stigma associated with it, surrounding domestic work, surrounding poverty. What do you think society can do to work towards breaking those stigmas, particularly for women?
Well, domestic work, there are over 2 million people in this country who do the work of caring and cleaning in our homes. And, there's something called a sandwich generation right now of people who are both caring for their children and their parents. And it is the work that makes all other work possible, but these workers are usually the most vulnerable because they don't have any type of job security. I did not have a sick day. If I called in sick, I risked being fired because then I was seen as, unreliable. And, there was childcare issues. There were a lot of things that I dealt with that prevented me from just getting to the workplace. I think as a country, domestic work is seen as undignified. I think there's a thing that we do where we assign dignity to the jobs that we do instead of just being a human being. And so we confuse that with, if there's lacking dignity, then there's lacking skill, there's lacking, education in that position. And all of that is not true. For a lot of people, the domestic work is the most flexible because they can do it self-employed, they can bring their children with them. And so, I think for many domestic workers, the thing that they need is benefits, is job security, is reliable pay, and to be treated like a normal employee.
Right, and it's really just a testament to the fact that a lot of individuals really believe that the work is a reflection of the human being that does it, as opposed to recognizing that all work is honorable and has value. I'd like to really talk about something else in your memoir, and that's the age you were when it takes place. I believe it takes place when you were 28. And, I'm curious about what's the reaction that you got from readers, because 28 is an age when many are, post-college, for example. What was the reaction that you got, or the expectations that you were navigating based on how old you were at the time the novel takes place?
So I try not to hear from people. I try not to go looking for people who didn't like my book, but they find me. And a lot of people say, but she's so old. I didn't understand, what happened in her 20s? Didn't she go to college? Didn't she have some sort of financial security by the time that she was in her late 20s? And the answer is no. I was working. There was no money for college. There's a scene in my second book, Class, where I come to my dad with a brochure for a college that I want to go to, and his question is, well, how are you going to pay for that? And he didn't guide me in like how to do that. It was just like, well, I'm not paying for it. And so I didn't go to college. It was a huge expense. When I graduated college, I was $50,000 in debt, and I thought I had like failed my children. And so, it was not a lack of work, it was a lack of pay. I mean, I worked sometimes 2 or even 3 jobs throughout my 20s. I had medical bills. I had to pay rent. Even as a single person is very difficult to do. And so when I added a child to the mix, I found myself homeless.
Right. Well, first off, I want to tell you, 28 is not old.
Well, old. I mean, these are people on Goodreads.
Yeah. I think you said so much. I mean, I think what's interesting is that the reality is, although many individuals go to college, some go to college, and the reality is many of us do not. And college is a pathway, is only one of many pathways that Americans take in their pathway to work. And so recognizing that there are so many other things, skilled trade, et cetera, that people do is important. And then also recognizing the huge cost of college. College is not the answer, especially with student loan debts on the rise. So we're sitting here with a group of folks from the financial services industry, and I'd love for you to talk about what were some of the biggest hurdles that you faced when accessing, banking and insurance while living in poverty.
Well, when I was living in poverty, it was 10, 15 years ago. I did not have direct deposit. I had to write paper checks and put them in the mail, and there were so many times that things did not line up in the way that I was wanting them to, and suddenly I had $30 in overdraft fees. And I would just watch it add up to the point where when I finally did deposit my paycheck, there was $100 of it that was just gone. And it never felt like anything was working for me or helping me in any way. I just felt like I was continually penalized. And it wasn't necessarily my fault a lot of the time. But there are a lot of hidden fees. I had to declare bankruptcy because of medical bills, and the credit card that I received had $100 a year annual fee. There's 30% interest rate. There's all of these hidden fees and penalties just for being poor. And 4 years ago when I purchased my house, I had mortgage insurance, and I had because I didn't have a high enough down payment, and that's there's a lot of things out there that we refer to poor taxes, and what it really does is it makes being poor more expensive. And if you don't have a cabinet that's big enough to store bulk toilet paper, you're paying a lot more for toilet paper. It's just if you are interested in it, there's a lot out there that you could learn about it. But I think it's the one thing that I have the most trouble with describing to people is just how expensive it is to be poor.
Yeah, I think that's powerful. The hidden costs that always add up, and the poverty tax that is often applied that many of us are unaware of. Throughout your journey, you talked about the importance of community support and community services. How can communities, including financial services institutions, better support individuals facing financial hardships to reduce or eliminate that poverty tax?
Well, I travel a lot for my job, and I meet a lot of people who are doing really creative things within their communities. And the things that I have seen that are the most inclusive and the most welcoming and not patronizing in some way is they just assume that everybody needs the service. It's not, well, let's set this up for people who can't budget or might need parenting classes, or, it's, let's just set this up for anybody who might need it, because you never know, your neighbor might be struggling to make ends meet. They might be on food stamps even. Just because people appear to have everything together doesn't mean that they do. And, the more that you look at your community as a collective and as human beings who all hold the same amount of dignity, then, when you set up things for people in your community who lack services, I think it makes it more accessible, because then everybody knows about it, and you don't have to go searching for it. There was a phone number that I used to use all the time. It was 211 for help, and there was a lady on the other end of the line who had gas vouchers, who just received a grant for rental assistance, and that was huge, because otherwise I would have to go looking for it. I would have to call 4 different organizations. I would sometimes have to go in person. It's a whole other part-time job to receive services. And when you're teetering and working so much, I was working and going to school and being a single parent, you don't have a lot of time for that kind of stuff. And so, a lot of people like to ask me, what would you tell a person in your position what they need to do? And I always flip that, and I'm like, no, we need to talk to the people who have means and tell them what they need to do, and tell them thank you, to be more forthcoming with things that they have. It's not an if you build it, they will come. It's if you build it, your neighbors who are already there will be able to access it.
Right. And I want, just one final question for you. So many of the solutions that we've talked about today are economic. But one of the things that I think we're just now waking up to as a society is the real mental health trauma associated with poverty, the loss of a sense of agency that you might have. And then when we talk about mental health in the context of poverty, we talk about how people should be resilient, as if making trauma their new normal, as opposed to really helping them navigate mental health care. What advice or what insights can you share on people who are working directly with individuals who are facing poverty about the mental health challenges and how to better support?
So I ended up, thinking about this a lot through writing my second memoir, because people kept asking me with Maid and other things that I've written about weren't you angry? And my response was always, well, I didn't have time to be angry. Do you realize how much time anger takes? But it was also, if I was angry, then people would not speak to me as if I was not angry. If I showed anger or confusion or frustration at, a social services organization, I was treated differently. And that's especially, we don't really listen to angry people. We especially don't listen to angry Black and brown people. And so there's part of it where I was kind of expected to be this Oliver Twist character, a very acceptable, palatable poor person. And that makes all of my mental health issues go away. It tells me, you cannot be anything but a superhero. And, I was supposed to be a superhero without having any kind of self-care. I barely had time to take a bath or a long shower, let alone go get a massage. I couldn't access therapists. I couldn't access mental health care. I did not have health insurance. I did not have access to prescription medication. All of that was out of my means. And so when people like to talk a lot about kind of as a defense mechanism, they list bad decisions that poor people make that put them in that place. And I see that as, well, if they made bad decisions, then I don't have to worry about that happening to me because I made good decisions. But I have always seen that as, looking back on that time with myself and going through all of this, I didn't have the privilege to feel. I didn't have the privilege to talk about what I was struggling with. I did not have the ability to learn about PTSD and all of the things that I know a lot about now. But then it was just, I was in survival mode. I was constantly in fight or flight. I was constantly triggered by things. And there was no relief from that. There was no help. There was no identification or validation even. Right. And so when you're expecting a person who is hungry, to have healthy coping skills like that's impossible.
Wow. I think it's really incredible. I'm so inspired by your journey. I'm so inspired by and honored that you chose to come here and share your story with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.